Oh, that's looking better.
I'm not seeing the text part though. I don't
There
use.
should be like a Skype group on the left that has names on it. It says Sauces Baldy
Right.
live chat.
Uh huh.
Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, so that's
There it
where,
is. There
so
it is.
Rick will start to post questions here. After you introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
All right.
See it? Okay.
Yes, I do. Let's see. Let me turn off. So my computer monitor's not in the way, is it? No, maybe a little bit. There. There.
No, looks good.
Okay.
So the questions should be coming in now.
I don't know where the name goes.
Okay. So it's best to, just first introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on your work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you when to begin, okay?
All right. Should I kill the chat or our video part though, or our?
Yes, definitely. I'm going to hang up right now.
Okay.
You're about to be live.
Okay, just tell me on the chat then. All right, good morning. I'm Dr. Peter Sharpe with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. We have been reintroducing bald eagles to the California Channel Islands since 1980, and I have been involved in the project since 1997, so this is my 20th season working with the bald eagles on the islands. The reason we're doing the bald eagle restoration in the first place is because they were wiped out by the pesticide DDT, which caused them to lay thin-shelled eggs, which broke in the nest before the chicks could hatch, and therefore slowly the eagle population just completely disappeared from the Channel Islands. Now through our efforts, we have about 20 pairs of bald eagles scattered across 5 of the 8 California Channel Islands, up from 0 in 1980. So we're making quite the headway. Of course, the biggest thing that happened was that we got rid of the use of DDT in the U.S. and Canada. So DDT was banned for use in 1972, although we are still seeing the effects of it to this day, because there's a huge dump off the Palos Verdes Peninsula, which is on the mainland across from the Channel Islands, and so DDT residue is still getting into the food chain. But we are now at the point where most of the eggs do hatch, and we no longer have to do the efforts which we did in the past, which were taking the eggs, hatching them, and then fostering chicks back into the nest. Now, as we have here on Sauces, the adults are able to hatch their own eggs and raise the chicks. So we've come a long way in the last 35 years. Some of the questions I'm getting, where does the name Sauces come from? That is the name of the canyon that this nest is in on the western end of Santa Cruz Island. To tell you the truth, I don't know what Sauces means. It is, I believe, Spanish. These birds should learn to fly when they're between 10 and a half and 12 weeks of age. Probably from 8 weeks on, they're going to be doing a lot of wing exercises, flapping in the nest, jumping around to build up their muscle, and then they will eventually take their first flight. It's not a learned thing, it's all instinctual. The adults aren't off the nest somewhere trying to entice them off the nest. Eventually the bird just gets up the courage or catches wind accidentally and takes their first flight. So the first one usually isn't very pretty. They'll glide and flap a little bit, usually land on a nearby hillside, and then over the next few days they'll learn to control their flight a little bit more and get back to the nest for feedings. Let's see. What's with the big news sticks? I haven't seen those being brought in, but as the chicks get older, the adults will put up more protection around the edges of the nest to try to keep them on the nest. As the chicks get a little bit older, they're just going to start perching along the edges of the nest and break down those sides. Eventually this whole nest is probably just going to be sort of a flat-topped grassy area. We try to ban the chicks by the time they're 8 weeks old, so sometime in the next couple of weeks we're going to try to get out there for the banding. Depending on when I can get there, they may or may not get the patagial wing markers, but they will definitely get leg bands. And this year we've been able to put orange leg bands with a number letter combination on birds on Catalina Island. We've now got permission to do that up on Santa Cruz Island and the Northern Channel Islands, so they will be identifiable by an orange leg band as well as a silver Fish and Wildlife Service leg band. Standard diet from our studies is about 85% fish, at least when we were doing the research here on Catalina Island, about 10% birds, and the rest sort of unidentifiable things that are brought to the nest. I think it really depends on the weather, what is being taken by the adults. If it's rough water, it's harder to fish, so at that point they may go for the birds, the gulls, or pick up. They seem to be bringing in a lot of placenta from the beaches, so there's marine mammals having young on the nearby beaches. Will there be a point where the population is self-sustaining? I think we're pretty much at that point right now. As long as they continue to have about one chick per nest per year, we should be able to maintain and increase the population of eagles on the islands. So right now we're not really helping the eagles, we're just monitoring them. We no longer have to take the eggs, we no longer have to foster chicks. So the eagles are doing everything on their own now. What can we tell you about how remote these nests are? It really varies. Here on Catalina Island, where I live, there are nests where we can actually drive to the base of the tree. There are other nests which are about a 45-minute hike after an hour-and-a-half drive. On Santa Cruz Island, they are more remote. This Sauces one is about an hour-and-a-half drive from where we reach the island by boat, and then it's only about a 10 to 15 minute hike if I zoomed out this camera, you could actually see the road up in the background. There's other nests that I'll probably be banding maybe next weekend on Santa Cruz. It's a good hour and a half hike up over one of the higher ridges on the island, down some steep rocky slopes. It's not for the faint of heart for that one. What's the possibility of recovering the two arbor's egg to figure out why it didn't hatch? I actually did that last Friday evening. So I got the egg. It wasn't fertile, or if it was fertile, it died early in development. So last Saturday I opened up the egg and put it into the contents into a sterile jar, and we'll eventually have that analyzed for contaminants. But it wouldn't have, if it was a DDT problem, the egg would have broken by this point. So it's probably just a developmental or a non-fertilization problem. How has nest cam technology helped in our project? It's made it a lot easier to monitor the nests. I have cameras on quite a few different nests. Some of them are live online. Some are ones that I actually go out and just with a laptop plug into an antenna and monitor that way. So it allows us to get a better look into the nests without actually going near the nest to disturb the adults. It also allows us to have our online forums where they're recording their observations, and for those I don't really even have to watch the nests. I can come back in the evening after watching all our other nests that aren't online and look through the comments and make sure that chicks are being fed, get an idea of what's being brought into the nest, and get a really good idea of when eggs were laid, for instance, so we have a good estimate of when to expect chicks. How did the bald eagle get its name? From what I've read, it's from Old English, bald, B-A-L-D-E, which meant white-headed, so it didn't necessarily mean no feathers or hair. So I think that's where originally the bald came from. It didn't mean that they didn't have feathers, it's just that they had the white head. Fledge watch generally begins about 10 and a half weeks. The males tend to fly younger and the females a little bit older. So sometimes the females won't fly until 12, 13 weeks of age. And they will continue to come back to the nests. There's a question about the disease risk with the eagles on the islands versus if they were on the mainland. I think the disease risk is much lower on the islands because there's less likelihood of a sick bird flying the 20 some odd miles out to the islands. So I think if the eagles were nesting along the mainland coastline, then we'd have a much higher risk of disease. But we don't tend to get much in the way of disease out here on the islands, at least so far. Somebody's asking about the eagles at Hanover, where one chick hatched and lived a day and the other egg didn't hatch. That unfortunately does happen. We've had it happen quite a few times on the islands. It's just probably a failure to thrive for the young chick. It could be something such as the umbilicus not being entirely closed when it hatched and it gets contaminants in there and gets an infection and dies. Variety of different problems. So it's really impossible to say, and there's no way to retrieve the chicks in time to determine why they died. Somebody's asking if we've seen any effects of the change in water temperature and climate change on the Channel Islands. From year to year, the water temperature does seem to affect the fish availability. We've had some years where the eagles just can't seem to get enough fish. Um, and it can be pretty sad. I think the one year I can think of, the West End nest had 3 chicks, and they just were having a very difficult time bringing enough food for all of those chicks. So I think the biggest impact that we're going to have here is the change in water temperature, and perhaps their preferred fish, such as mackerel, moving further north and not being as available. Someone's asking if we can tell who's the oldest chick by the fuzz on their heads and who loses it first. Not necessarily. Feather development is partially age and partially diet. So if you have a more aggressive but younger bird who tends to get more of the food, they may actually develop quicker in terms of feathers. Sometimes you'll go to a nest at banding. You know the birds are within a couple days of each other, but one bird will look like it's about 5-6 weeks old, and the other looks like it's 8 weeks old. So a lot of the development depends on how much food they're getting. Someone's asking how we can protect birds of prey from extinction. Probably the best, well, there's a lot of ways. One is, especially for birds that are scavengers, is to stop the use of lead ammunition in hunting. So many bald eagles and golden eagles die from ingesting the lead that they get from the gut piles left by hunters, or carcasses that weren't found after they were shot. Providing habitat for them to use, providing areas where they can find prey. So don't pave over everything, leave things wild. And basically watch what we put into the environment. DDT was a big problem. There's always the potential for some other poison to come down the pike and start being used before we know what its impacts are on the birds. Let's see. When the chicks fledge, how long do the parents stay with them, and do the parents teach them to hunt? The chicks usually stick around the territory for about a month after they take their first flight, and the adults do not teach them how to hunt. The chicks pick that up naturally over their first year or two. They're generally scavengers for the first year, so they travel around a lot looking for dead things on the beaches, along the roads, following ravens or turkey vultures to find dead things. Sorry about that. There goes my camera. That's probably why we have such high mortality during the first year. Usually about 50% of the chicks don't survive through the first year, and that's just because they don't learn to find the food on their own. Are bald eagles still endangered? No, they were removed from the endangered species and threatened species list, I believe in 2007. What education do I need for my job? I started this job with a master's degree. For my research assistants, I look for at least a bachelor's degree in biology, largely because our permitting can be sort of hard to get, and the state wants to make sure that we're having good people working on the project. I do have a PhD in zoology, which I actually finished after I started the job here. What can second graders do to help save bald eagles? Um, I would just be careful what you do in your life, the things that you dump into the environment, the trash. Um, just be good to the environment, and the eagles will do fine if as long as we're not destroying their environment. How do we track banded eagles? And do we have any that are that were chicks and now adults and having their own chicks? All the eagles that are on the islands were released here or hatched here. So either brought here when they were about 8 weeks old or have hatched from nests. So we do have second and third generation eagles breeding out here that were once chicks here on the island. Mostly how we track the birds now is through the bird banding lab, which is in charge of keeping track of all the birds that are banded in the U.S. So every time we band a bird, we have to send a report to the bird banding lab. They put it in their records. And then as other people see these birds elsewhere, they can also go online and report to the bird banding lab that they saw this particular bird at this particular place. And the bird banding lab will cross that with their records and then send both the reporter and the bander a report of where this bird was seen or banded. For instance, 2 days ago I was out doing peregrine falcon surveys on Catalina, and I found a peregrine that had a leg band on it that I was able to read. I reported it to the bird banding lab, but I also contacted the two other banders that I thought may have banded this bird, because it was a 1-year-old peregrine, and it turned out that it was banded down at Point Loma in San Diego last May. So, we all work together, both professionals and hobbyists who go out and watch birds, and so we all work together to track these birds via their bands. Do the bald eagles prey on island foxes as the golden eagles do? Bald eagles don't tend to go for live mammalian prey. I'm not going to say they never kill a fox. We have seen a couple fox brought into the nest, but there's no way to tell if they were dead before or after the bald eagles found them. The golden eagles definitely kill the foxes. They like to eat mammalian prey, and we've had nests with half a dozen foxes in it when we went in to try to trap the adults. Have we seen the eagle nest with juvenile parents that are in the news up by Azusa and San Gabriel Dam? I'm not aware of that one, unless it's the Las Casitas birds. And if it's the Las Casitas one, the female is a bird that we banded here on Catalina Island. How far do the kids fly once they're on their own? And how do they end up with a mate from another family? When we used to put GPS transmitters on the eagles, which would give us maybe 10 or to 14 points per day for a bird, we've had them fly from Southern California up to central British Columbia, over to Alberta, Montana, so they can go thousands and thousands of miles, and generally they'll come back to within about 200 miles of where they hatched for breeding. So eventually, as they age, get maybe 4 to 5 years old, they'll start looking for a mate and select a territory. So they may find another unmated bird and set up a new territory. They may find a territory and kick out one of the birds there and take over. So there's a variety of ways that they can find a mate. Let's see. Give some of my background on my interest in eagles and raptors. let's see, when I was doing my PhD, I was working on ground squirrels, but it was part of a larger project looking at the prey for birds in the snake river birds of prey area. So that's probably where general interest started coming in. While I was in grad school, I did volunteer at a raptor center for a couple years in Fort Collins, Colorado. So that gave me more hands-on with actual raptors. I actually did do some spotted owl work between my master's and my PhD. And then this position here with the eagles was only supposed to be 9 months with the possibility of extension, which obviously we've extended. And I consider myself really a wildlife biologist. I'm not really a raptor biologist because I'm interested in a variety of species. But you know, being on the islands here and getting the opportunities to work with different raptors has been very enjoyable and informative. So far I've worked with bald eagles, osprey, peregrine falcons, and done some banding on American kestrels and saw-whet owls out here. So it's just sort of, I guess, sort of lucked into the current position I'm in. So I was asking if interbreeding among eagle families in this kind of closed habitat caused any infertility problems. Not that we've seen. Our Fraser Point nest is actually a brother and sister nesting, and they've, except for this year when a golden eagle has been harassing them, they've had chicks for the last several years with no apparent genetic problems, or at least no obvious physical problems. I guess we'll see once those chicks start breeding whether there's an inbreeding problem, but we have not seen an inbreeding problem. I just don't know how much of a problem that is in birds. Let's see, how old are the eagle parents? I'm assuming that's on the Sauce's nest. I gotta look that up real quick. A40, the male, hatched in 2005, so he's 11 this year. A48 was 2006, so she's 10. Do we see the banded fledged chicks often, like Nugget, Hoolet, and Sky? No. I don't tend to see them. I mean, these islands are huge. Catalina is 76 square miles or so. Santa Cruz is 100 square miles. So these birds can be anywhere, either on the islands or on the mainland. We do get occasional sightings of them. Often can't determine who they are because we see them at a distance. So we don't get a lot of sightings until they generally start breeding somewhere else or back on the islands. What is the lifespan of a bald eagle? In captivity they can live over 40 years. I think the record in the wild is about 35 years. We've had 30-year-old birds here on Catalina a couple times. The average, though, I would say, if they make it through their first year, is probably more like 10 to 15 years. If they get ill or injured and can't hunt, then there's not, another bird is not going to bring them food. How long does it take for the chicks to hatch? Well, the typical incubation period is 35 days. It's generally a couple days longer than that because of incomplete incubation during the laying of the clutch of eggs. So, for instance, the first egg may take 37 to 39 days to hatch after it was laid. The actual hatching process takes about 48 hours. So the first stage is called an internal pip, and that's when the chick will actually break into the air cell inside the egg. So you won't see anything external, but that's when they start to breathe and vocalize. What causes the actual breaking of the eggshell is CO2 buildup inside the egg, and it gives the chick spasms in its neck, and causes a little egg tooth on their beak to hit the eggshell and break open. So about 24 hours after the internal pip, you get an external pip, and that's just the first little break in the eggshell. It's usually just a really slight rise that's hard to see. And then over the next 24 hours, that usually gets a little bit bigger, and then the actual hatching, opening up the egg shell, really only takes about an hour, and it's just the chick rotating in the egg with muscle spasms, and just sort of like a can opener opens up the end of the egg. Let's see. What is the lifespan? Oh no, we did that one. Do both parents take turns leaving the nest to get food for the chicks? When the chicks are young, the female generally stays on the nest and the male brings the food. As the chicks get older, as they are now on the sauce's nest, both adults will go off and hunt. And in another couple weeks, when the chicks are essentially full grown at 8 to 9 weeks, the adults are going to just tend to fly in, drop off food, and leave, because the chicks get very aggressive towards the food at that point. What is the size of the largest nest I have seen? We don't tend to get the really deep nests like the Pacific Northwest does in trees. The biggest nest I have seen is here on Catalina Island at our Pinnacle Rock nest, and it's actually just on a sort of a rock outcropping on a cliff, and I can actually lie down in that nest with my hands over my head and not touch either side. So it's about 8 to 9 feet across and maybe 5 feet wide. So it's a longer, narrower nest, but that's probably the largest I've seen. Did I ever find out for sure which eaglet at Sauces is the oldest? No, I haven't. I still think the smaller one is the older one, though, and that it's probably a male and the other one is a female. So because females are 25% larger than males, if the second one was female, it could easily overtake the first chick in size. Why don't the chicks have yellow beaks like their parents? They get that as part of the maturation process. So as they get 3.5, 4 years old, they start to get the white head, their beak starts to turn from dark to yellow, their eyes actually start turning from dark to a light cream color. So all these changes take place over about a 2 to 3 year period. Somebody asking how close photographers can venture to a nest without alarming the adults. That really varies with the nest and the adults. For us, generally, we try to keep 800 feet from a nest when we're doing observations, but there are places where the birds are fine with you getting much closer. Generally, if you're below them, they're not as wary as if you're above them. But I would try to stay at least a couple hundred feet away, and if the adults are flying or vocalizing, then you're disturbing them and you need to move away. Okay, somebody asking about my thoughts when I first did the dangling from the helicopter for egg retrieval. I did not know that was part of the job when I applied for it. I came from Southern Illinois, flat land pretty much, sort of scared of heights. So the first time we hooked up to the helicopter, I was 100 feet at the end of a 100-foot tether attached to the bottom of the helicopter, and we'd hooked up to my harness, and then for probably 5-10 minutes we were just sort of moving around, discussing the lift and everything. And when we started, the helicopter took off, got above me, and just put a little bit of tension on the line. The hook had actually worked its way out of my harness as it was just dragging around on the ground. So I got up on my tiptoes and then was released. He had to lower it down, I had to hook back into it, and then we did the lift. So that was sort of my introduction to making sure that you're holding on to the hook to the helicopter the whole time. And if you see any of the videos, I just sort of hold it, keep it above my head until there's tension on the line, and then take off. So it was a bit scary the first time. Actually, the first 10 times or so, I was not real comfortable with it. Somebody saw an eagle steal chicks out of the osprey nest on Explorer. Do they also do that with within their own species? They probably do take chicks that are not being watched over from other eagle nests. We did have one nest on Santa Cruz Island where it wasn't an adult eagle, it was a sub-adult, probably 2 or 3 years old, but it actually attacked the 2 chicks that were on the nest, dragged them both out of the nest, put some punctures in the beak of one chick, and I broke the wing of the other one. We were able to recover both and rehabilitate them and release them, and one of those is still alive. How many chicks, or what's the most that I've seen fledge from a nest? That would be 3 from a couple of years of our West End nest, had 3 chicks successfully fledge. Because we generally don't have food shortages out here, because they're surrounded by water with fish and birds, generally anything that hatches, unless it succumbs to an accident, survives to fledging. How long will adult eagles continue to breed? That's another good question, because usually no one knows how old the birds are. Ours is one of the few projects where we actually know the identity of the adults. We did have attempted breeding at least up through 30, 31 years of age, although she was not successful in hatching eggs the last few years. I think our oldest currently breeding is a 1993 bird. So she's, at 23, 24 years of age. So at least up until their mid-20s, they can successfully breed. Okay, waiting on some more questions. I'm going to go to some that are actually on the Explorer site. Somebody worrying about the radiation in the ocean from Fukushima in the fish and then in the eagles. I don't think that's really going to be an issue. There's a difference between detectability and harm. So anything that is picking up radiation currently, it's detectable, but it's not at a harmful level. So I don't really think radiation is going to be an issue. Oh, and that was the next question there. Somebody asking if bald eagles make sure that each chick gets fed during feedings, or do they just feed the closest mouth? And they just feed whoever comes to them for food. So if there's, in the pecking order, the one that's the most aggressive is going to eat first, and if there's food remaining, the younger or less aggressive chicks will also get fed. But feeding all the chicks equally, especially during a low food year, is not a good evolutionary strategy, because you could just starve all your chicks. If you feed whoever comes to you first, you have a higher likelihood of fledging at least one of your chicks. Someone is asking about K10 and K26, which were our Pelican Harbor birds. We haven't been able to identify them this year. We know that at least one has orange wing tags, so it's one of the two birds likely. Unfortunately, they failed a couple weeks ago, so I'm not sure we can get the opportunity to actually identify the adults this year. So someone's asking about our funding and what that means for the CAMs. Currently we are funded through 2017 through the Montrose Settlements Restoration Program, which is a pot of money that was taken in lawsuit settlements over the DDT pollution. I think there's a pretty good likelihood that we'll get extended a little bit past that at least to continue monitoring the eagles, especially if we continue to have years such as this year and last year where we have a lot of failures during the incubation stage. Don't know if that's just young inexperienced birds or if it's an actual problem with the eggs. So I think we'll be able to continue at least some monitoring of the birds. I'd like to be able to keep at least a couple of the webcams going to help us monitor some of the more remote nests, and it is, you know, a good educational and fundraising tool as well. So I'm not sure if we're getting any more questions. That may be it for today, unless somebody has a last minute question. All right, well, I guess that is it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and perhaps we can do another one of these when the chicks get a little bit closer to fledging on the sauce's nest. All right. Oh, we did get another last one here. How long do the babies stay with the mother until they go off on their own? Generally a month in the territory, then they'll start exploring the island. They may come back to their territory a few times, but essentially they're with their parents for a month after they learn to fly. And I think that is it. So thank you very much.